Hey guys, Mr. Ehrlich here. I just wanted to talk to you today about the effects of the Industrial Revolution. So you can see there on the screen our learning target that we've been using throughout our unit so far is I can explain the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution. And so today we're going to focus, of course, on the effects of the Industrial Revolution, both positive and negative effects. First, let's do a warm up. Go ahead and pause your video and match the inventor to his invention. All right, we're back. Let's see how you did. One, James Watt is, of course, going to be C, the steam engine. James Watt created the steam engine. And then two, Thomas Edison famously created the light bulb, choice D. Number three, Henry Bessemer invented the steel making process, choice A. And then four, Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, so choice E. And then five, Louis Pasteur, the discovery of bacteria. All right, so let's start talking about the impact of industrialization. And what I'd like you to do is take a piece of paper, make a T-chart, write positive on one side, on the left, negative on the right. And as we talk about these impacts, you can list them under either positive or negative. And then at the very end, we'll compare our lists to see how you did. But I highly encourage you to do this throughout the video as as we talk about the different impacts. All right. So the first impact that we're going to talk about is poor working conditions for lower classes, and you can kind of see in this picture, it clearly shows a factory. This is a cotton spinning room in a factory. This is actually from 1911 from Magnolia, Mississippi, and it is the Magnolia Cotton Mill spinning room. You can see the little ones scattered around, so there are kids working in that factory too. Factory owners could set the terms of work because there were far more unskilled laborers who had few skills and would take any job than there were jobs for them. So what that means is basically there were more people than there were jobs available. Okay, and that has an impact because since the textile industries were so new at the beginning of the 18th century, they were initially no laws to regulate them. The government came in or did not come in and say that these certain safeties needed to be in place to protect the workers. So really, the factory owners could do just about anything and ask their workers to do just about anything. And if you complained, there were always, three or four people waiting for a job to be able to take your position. So there was really nothing that you could do about it if you were just a worker. But desperate for work, the migrants to new industrial towns had no bargaining power to demand higher wages, fairer working hours, or better working conditions. All right, this is a picture of some boys coming off working the night shift for a glass company. This is actually the old Dominion Glass Company. And they're coming off working the night shift at their factory in Alexandria, Virginia. This picture comes from 1911. The boys in the front are probably about, 11, 12 years old. The boys in the back are probably a little bit older, maybe 15, 16 years old. But think about your age. Right now, you're 12 or 13. There's a very good chance that if you had lived during this time period, during, around the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, you may have been working in a factory or you may have been working for an hourly wage. Here are some more boys. These boys would have worked in a coal mine. They worked at the Turkey Knob Coal Mine in McDonald, West Virginia. This picture is from 1907. 1907. You can see their faces are black with soot, all that dust that comes from coal dust that comes from working in a coal mine. Think about this too. All that black soot that's on their faces, that was in their lungs too, because they breathed that in. They didn't wear masks. There really wasn't a whole lot of knowledge back then about the hazards of working in a coal mine. That would have affected their health many years later, though. Black lung was a disease that many people who worked in coal mines got, and it was not something that was curable. Usually that meant that you died. And people who worked in coal mines usually had shorter lifespans than those around them because of that black soot that got into their lungs and really affected their health. All right. Next topic, next impact is improved and greater access to education. This picture shows the students at the Sunset School in Mary, West Virginia. This is Pocahontas County, and this picture comes from 1921. The growth of standardization and assembly line manufacturing required legions of skilled and more educated workers. That means not all positions in a factory were unskilled, and so therefore, people realized that a standardized education system was necessary. Standardization was the best way to ignite education. Classrooms became standardized in textbooks and content, teaching materials, teaching methods, and classroom design. This efficiency allowed important mass education for a growing country. So, just like products were being mass produced in a factory, education was being mass produced in the classroom. A literate, educated citizenry greatly facilitated the growth of industry and manufacturing. Here's another picture of students with their teacher. This picture comes from 1905. It may be South Carolina. Students pose in front of the schoolhouse with their teacher. As educational access widened, the education of women increased and the study of classical curriculum declined. So basically, back to the basics. And by the 20th century, school gained importance for both national economic development and individual development. Gains in income and wealth during the industrial age made possible larger public expenditures or more amounts of money being spent by government for the welfare, excuse me, of the general population. And all governments considered schooling to be in their on their radar, on their greater social calculus for of importance to make sure that their citizenry was educated, because that would impact the economy and the types of jobs that could be held in their community. There's another picture of a schoolhouse. This is the Pepperwood School in Pepperwood in Humboldt County, California. The rewards of getting an education allowed well paid workers to buy homes, cars, and build communities. And that's kind of building up to the middle class that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. All right, our next topic is better forms of transportation. You can see kind of a old school meets new school here in this picture, where you've got horses pulling carts in front of ships that are driven by steam engines. All right, these of course would have worked a lot better than ships with sails, but the black smoke coming out of the smokestack shows that they're burning coal to run steam engines so they can sail up and down the river and carry people and manufactured goods from place to place. This is kind of a cool picture. This is the president's 40 horsepower white Model M steam powered touring car. And this belonged to President Taft in 1909. This was photographed on the White House grounds in the early days of President Taft's administration. And you can see in the back is the State Department, and it's now called the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, but that's still there. All right, and perhaps the most important development in transportation was the steam-powered locomotive or steam-powered train engine. And this would have carried cars full of either goods or people or both from place to place. We see, railroad tracks crisscrossing the country in the United States and all across Europe and Asia eventually. But the machinery developed during the Industrial Revolution and steam power revolutionized transportation with the steam locomotive. All right, our next topic is a higher standard of living. So, the Industrial Revolution allowed for a higher standard of living. And here in this picture, you see what looks like a wealthy family. It's kind of a neat picture because it looks like it maybe was burnt a little bit around the edges, or the negative got burnt, so it looks old. Kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. When we say a higher standard of living and wealth, that didn't necessarily mean the ultra wealthy or the very, very rich. Okay. A higher standard of living can also refer to things like leisure time. Okay. A higher standard of living means that, you don't have to spend all day working from dusk or from dawn until dusk. For example, working on the farm or working in the factory. Some jobs allowed some people to earn a little bit more money, to be able to enjoy some leisure time. Eventually, that would lead to things like appliances, electricity in homes, just certain things that would save people from having to do everything by hand. The next topic we're talking about is environmental pollution. And this is a picture from Chicago in 1905, the Chicago River east from the Rush Street Bridge. And you can see this kind of looks pretty dirty, doesn't it? Um, in the industrial part of a city or town, a lot of times there was a black film covering everything from all of that coal burning to run the machinery in the factories and from the steam powered ships. And so, since the Industrial Revolution was so new at the end of the 18th century, there was initially no laws to regulate new industries. For example, no laws prevented businesses from hiring 7-year-old children to work full time in coal mines or factories. That was definitely, child labor is definitely a negative of the Industrial Revolution, but also there were no laws to regulate pollution or no laws to regulate what factories could do with their biohazard waste, all right, including all of that smoke coming from smokestacks. Free market capitalism meant that the government had no role in regulating new industries or planning services for new towns. So the idea was at the time that it wasn't really the place of the government to regulate business, and so therefore there were really no government regulations for safety. And also at the time too, people really didn't understand all of the negative impacts that some of these pollutants could have if they were, just pumped into the air through smokestacks or dumped into the river. If waste was just dumped into the river, people didn't necessarily understand the negative impacts that it could have until later, and when it was too late, unfortunately. All right, here's another example too. This is a horse that unfortunately was overcome by heat and died in the streets of New York. This picture comes from 1910. This is another example of pollution too. As the population in cities rapidly increased, city governments really struggled to keep up with that population growth. And so, therefore, things like if your horse happened to die pulling the cart off, there was really nothing you could do but leave it there in the street. So there were, rotting horses in the street and horse waste and all of those different kinds of environmental pollutions that people had to deal with and contend with at the time as well. Here's a picture of a town or homes that was built around a factory. And like I said earlier, people didn't necessarily understand all of the hazards that went with the byproducts of production, all of the smoke and things like that. So all of these people that were living near the factory were, of course, exposed to all of that pollution. All right, our next topic is population increase. Up until about 1800, the world's population was below 1 billion. In 1800, it actually hit 1 billion. And that rapid increase to 1 billion was facilitated by the Industrial Revolution. We have better knowledge of agricultural techniques that come around at this time, machinery that is used to help grow crops and to better process things. And so, therefore, with more food comes a population increase, and the population increase grows rapidly. All right, so this is not just a population increase, but a rapid population increase. Along with that population increase means that people need clothes and they need more items and mass produced goods. And so, therefore, that leads to the increase of factories. This is a picture of the Boardwalk Parade at Atlantic City, New Jersey in April 1905. Just kind of a picture to illustrate a lot of people in one place. Here's a colorized photo of an Italian neighborhood street market. This is Mulberry Street in New York City. You can see a little bit of old meets new. Here's a horse and horse and wagon right here. But look at all those colorful fruits and vegetables and things that are available for the people to buy. All right, along with that population increase comes rapid urbanization. All right, as factories open up in cities and jobs become available, people move to the city. Now, urbanization itself is not necessarily always a bad thing, but rapid urbanization can be, in some circumstances, cannot be that great, especially if a city is not able to keep up with that huge population increase. All right. In other words, they're not able to keep up the standard of living for the people that live there. For example, people would live in apartment buildings, all kind of squashed and crammed together in apartment buildings called tenements. All right. These tenements were not very nice places to live. They were often dark and dirty, multiple families living in one small area, sometimes one family living in an apartment. There were not, some of the modern safety methods that we see today. There weren't fire alarms or sprinklers if a fire broke out. There wasn't necessarily easy access to escape from an apartment building if a fire were to break out. Here's a picture of a family of six. This picture comes from 1912. This is from a tenement in New York, on Elizabeth Street. Six people lived in this small apartment here. Of course, you only see three people here in the picture. You also see the stove right there, which looks like it's pretty filthy. All right. Looks like it's pretty filthy. Well, that would have been a wood burning stove. And that not only served as the cooking surface for the home, but also as the source of heat for this home. So you can kind of see how filthy and dark this particular apartment looks. All right. Well, not all living conditions were that bad. As a matter of fact, during the Industrial Revolution, we see the growth of the middle class. All right. This is a picture from Saratoga Springs in New York around 1915. This is Broadway at the United States Hotel. The Industrial Revolution did encourage a middle class of people who were not abundantly wealthy, but who also were not unskilled laborers in factories barely getting by. So it wasn't necessarily that there was a huge gap between which there was a huge gap between the ultra wealthy and those who were working in factories, but there developed a class in between those people who may have owned their own businesses, like small shops or restaurants or hardware stores, those who maybe were managers of a factory, or who worked in businesses or had mid-level positions in government. These people would have fit into what was called the middle class of the time. And there were also some artisans and skilled laborers whose jobs had not been replaced by machines yet, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, that also would have been part of the middle class. Middle class meaning that they had a fairly decent income that allowed them some of those comforts, luxuries like, eventually electricity in their homes and appliances like refrigerators, food refrigeration, or vacuum cleaners, and what else? Lights in their home, electricity in their home, other appliances, and things that made life more comfortable. Here's a middle class family. This is, I believe, a family in South Carolina, but it looks like they've, come together and built a home for themselves. They have clothing, they have a place to live. So this would be considered a middle class family. This is a picture from 1908 from Dillon, South Carolina. And then we've talked about this a couple of times. More leisure time for the upper and middle classes was an impact of the Industrial Revolution. And for those who are wealthy and those who are a part of the middle class and upper class, there would have been more time to spend on personal interests or doing things for entertainment, like taking a day and going to the beach. All right, so here's what I came up with for my T-chart. The positives on the left are improved education, better forms of transportation, growth of the middle class, and more leisure time. The negatives I came up with on the right: poor working conditions, pollution, and rapid urbanization. Your list may not look exactly like this list, especially if you were to argue, which you could argue that urbanization is not necessarily a negative thing. But I do want to point out that in this particular lesson, we talked about rapid urbanization. So urbanization, where people are moving from rural areas to cities at more of a fast pace than cities can keep up with. So though that usually led to unsafe living conditions and living in dirty or polluted environments, like those tenement apartment buildings that we saw in a couple of pictures a few slides back. All right, we're going to stop here, and where we're going to be going next are three responses to industrialization. And this is particularly going to focus on three responses, three economic responses, three different ways of thinking as a result of industrialization. And those three ways are capitalism, communism, and socialism. So we will talk about those in our next lesson. Thanks for watching.